Greetings and hello to everyone. This is the Business of Betting podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Williams. Today is episode 20, and we have Peter Ling joining the podcast. Peter runs the Secret Betting Club, which this host likes to call the TripAdvisor of tipsters. In an industry with unscrupulous touts and legitimate winners, the Secret Betting Club reviews, researches, and rates tipsters over the long term. The Secret Betting Club is an independent and quality service that helps punters and bettors with all the information that they need to succeed. As always, you can find us at businessofbetting.com or at bettingpod on Twitter. Please fire in any questions or feedback and potential guests you would like to hear from. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy my chat with Peter Ling. Today, I'm joined by Peter Ling. Peter, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks very much, Jake. I'm delighted to be invited onto the podcast.
So, Peter, for those who aren't aware of what you're up to, do you want to go into sort of your background and some of the history and your story and how you got involved with betting and, I guess, leading up to what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, we'll probably have to go back a good 15 years or so to when I first started getting interested in betting. So that's kind of my early 20s. Seems a long way now. Basically I always had an interest in sports, and I always had an interest in statistics and maths. So at the time, 15 years ago, betting was really starting to kind of become more and more popular. I kind of worked in a design job where I had access to the internet. No one was really checking what I was doing, so I had plenty of time to research sports, research betting markets, to kind of understand the different types of bets, all this kind of stuff. And it just really appealed to me. Obviously, it was easy to open betting accounts and to kind of get involved in the whole area of betting at the time. But I think I quickly realized that, to win at betting was really tough. Unless you had, real skills and expertise and also the time available to put into your kind of research and your betting, the bets that you place, it was really difficult. I kind of look at it like most people, when they talk about their driving ability, I think most people overestimate how good they are. They might say they're in the top 10, 20% of drivers, but the reality is, someone's in the bottom 10 and 20%. So I think it's the same with betting. People really overestimate how good or bad they are at, how good they are at betting. So I think I quickly realized that, and that's when I started to kind of get into the world of tipsters, which also led to the Secret Betting Club, which we'll no doubt discuss. So that's from there really, and so with that understanding, I started to research the whole world of tipsters. I started investing in a few and found a few good ones, found a few bad ones, and from there everything since then has kind of snowballed with SBC.
So what's the tipster culture like, and what was it like back when you were getting involved in the early days?
Well, it all started to change, obviously, with the internet and becoming, Wi-Fi become more widespread, and it's so much easier to set up websites and all this kind of stuff. So back probably when I was first starting, I think tipsters used to send sort of mail shots through the post, and there'd generally be the usual scam stuff. So it'd be like a fast car, a swimming pool, it'd be pictures of money, and it would kind of be touting, expensive fees with no proof and verification, and call it this premium phone line. But obviously with the internet, that kind of started to change. It reduced the costs. There was some transparency, so people could research and find out about different tipsters. So yeah, back what people were thinking of, maybe some people still have this kind of outdated idea of what tipsters are like, but it certainly has changed. So you no longer have to ring premium phone lines to be told to back a 2-9 favorite. So I mean, it was difficult at the time. So when we were researching, my future business partner and I, we were researching tipsters and the betting world. It was tough because there wasn't really easy access to information. But eventually we got there, and since then there's been a significant change in kind of how tipsters operate and how they're kind of evaluated.
So let's get into the Secret Betting Club. When did you start it?
Oh, that was May 2006. So we started back then, and because my business partner and I at the time, what we're soon to be future business partner, we were just working together as two friends interested in betting. He came from more of a financial market history background, so things like day trading, the stocks and shares. It's a different world to what I was used to, but together with my kind of knowledge of sports and his kind of background in data analysis and numbers and the financial side of things, is a good team. So we started to work together, following tipsters together, kind of analyzing different betting experts. And I remember we received through the post, it was a mail shot for a kind of tipster, not a tipster review site, but just a betting product review site, and tipster review kind of whatever systems are out there, any kind of products that they could get their hands on. But it was meant to be this review site, but actually some of the products it was reviewing were ultimately flawed. And it seemed, it was quite transparent to us that we could see some of these products, they were only being recommended probably because he was making a cut from, the recommendations from recommending these products. So for us at the time, it just made sense to do something a little bit different, because we knew there were some good products out there, and we could actually help people by providing them some actual genuine advice, rather than just because someone paid the highest fee for me to review them positively.
So I went on your site and spent a little bit of time on there, and then I went back and spent a little bit more time, and then went back and spent a little bit more time, and I was fascinated by the amount of really good information on there. And I guess it sort of struck me as for want of a better, or for a bad analogy, as the TripAdvisor of sports betting tipsters. And I guess you spend so much time and effort and resources in digging deep into what the tipsters are offering and exactly, how well they're doing in different sort of segments. And it was a fascinating insight to, I guess, an industry that has, as far as I've seen, been largely sort of seen as a scam, con artist sort of industry, and there's a lot of nefarious activity going on. So why don't you tell, I guess, me and also the listeners about sort of the mission statement and the aim of the site, and I guess what Secret Betting Club sort of means to you, and perhaps even a better analogy than my TripAdvisor of tipsters.
No, that's a good way of putting it. It's an easy comparison site for tipsters. There's a site in England, and it's called Which, and it would report on, compare different products. And so it's a good analogy. It's a good way of kind of explaining what we do a little bit. And you're right, we've been going 11 years, so there's a heck of a lot of information on there, because you can get the whole back catalogue. So if we reviewed someone back in 2008 and they're still going, you can read the original review, any subsequent re-reviews, and all the updates that we've provided upon them. So so if anyone, basically what we do, our mission statement is to help promote and find the very best betting tipsters. That's kind of the prime section of what we actually do. So our main work is dedicated to that. So that goes into some very in-depth reviewing of, once we identify the best tipsters, we then set in place a kind of a very detailed review process, where we identify and look into all aspects of the particular tipster. Once we reviewed them, we then report back on their progress. So we're not just leaving you with a tipster from 3 years ago and say there's a review. That's what our recommendation is. You kind of pick up on how they perform since then, because the idea being, we want to review and recommend those which have a long-term performance behind it, and which are able to maintain that performance. And off the back of that, because our remit has expanded beyond just who's a good tipster and who's the ongoing best tipster, to other areas that are connected to it. So it could be like the best bookmakers, the worst bookmakers. It might be discussions on restrictions and closures of betting accounts and what to do about that. It might be in a busy area. A big area that we do focus on is the psychological side of betting. How to deal with good runs and how to deal with bad runs. How to set up with the right kind of money management, which is a very overlooked kind of area of betting, especially if you're following a tipster, because you have to put your trust in them, so you need to make sure you're set up properly. It's a wider remit these days, but if you want to simplify it, definitely we're just a TripAdvisor for tipsters.
So you made a lot of great points there, and we'll touch on some of them as we go along. The first thing that sort of struck me when I was spending sort of a fair few hours going through a lot of the content was, why would tipsters with, long-term positive expectation value tips be giving them away? And obviously it's a lucrative trade if you can be winning long-term, because you're going to have a lot of followers and perhaps subscribers and things like that. But what are some of the, I guess, discussions that you've had with those tipsters, and some of the reasons behind why they are happy to, sign up to your service and sign up to give away or have subscribers buy their tips?
Well, I guess people want to develop a business around their expertise, and rather than just rely on their betting income, which, as anyone that bets will know, betting returns can be volatile. You could be up, you could have a fantastic month one month and then lose a lot the next, and it's about the long term. So I think many people are looking to supplement their betting income by setting up a business. Why do people prove to us, if you like, and why do people want to kind of get our trust? I think that goes back to some of the original points where the industry's kind of got this slightly a bit of a bad reputation. So you need to they want to be verified, they want to be proven to be running a fair service with good customer service, with a long history of performance, which other third parties can verify.
So how have the tipsters responded to some of the in-depth coverage you've had? And it's not sort of one and done either. It's year by year analysis and a lot of really good sort of deep insights into what they're doing. Has there been any reluctance from certain tipsters?
Yeah, I mean, we've always come across reluctance, always found certain reviews to be difficult. If it ultimately goes back to, we have to tell what's accurate. So if our reputation rises and falls, and if we, on making sure our reviews are as in-depth and as accurate as possible. So if I review a tipster and find a tipster and I find there's a flaw in their particular product, I can't not write about that. I have to put that forward, and it does, make for some difficult conversations at times. But how a tipster often reacts to that is really informative. I can think of two examples where recently, over the past 6 to 12 months, where there's been two different tipsters that I've reviewed at different times, and both had some substantial flaws that we were able to uncover. The first tipster, we put it to him, and he was, he'd made some mistakes. His record keeping was poor, and we found some holes in his results. And he just held his hands up and said, "Look, yeah, I made a mistake. It wasn't good enough," and started to explain some of those reasons and what he's going to do differently. And then, he offered a bit of a free trial, and just ability to kind of build the confidence of the person that was reading the review, because he knew we were going to publish it. And then another guy recently, I reviewed his product, and it's only by digging into the actual product itself and its results, we're able to ascertain that there was some kind of, some results in there that weren't kind of adding up particularly well. They were based on different kind of bets that weren't very obvious. So it's only by drilling into it we're able to pick it out. And we said, look, we have to make this clear, because the results you're putting forward are not, to my mind, are not going to be replicated by our members. If someone joins your service, if they think they're going to make X amount of profit, but reality is they're not going to make that at all. They're going to make significantly less. They're not going to be particularly happy. So I have to put that forward. His response was pretty negative. He thought I was casting aspersions on his service and the people that work there, and claiming all kinds. So you kind of get these different responses, but I guess that's it's all part and parcel of being a review service. Most of the time the tipsters we focus on are actually the good ones, because that's where we want to put our attention, that's where we want to put our time, because ultimately that's where it's going to have the most benefit for people that join our service. But occasionally, as we get into some of the results or get into aspects of the service with the in-depth reviews and in-depth data analysis that we perform, we do pick out some of these problems. And it's never nice to have these kind of confrontations.
Yeah, absolutely. So what segment of the betting sort of market are using tipsters? Is it, or who do they sort of appeal to? Because certainly if I don't have any expertise in an area or a sport and I want to have a bet because I like that sport, I don't necessarily want to buy tips, especially if I'm not betting too much money. So are there a certain segment or type of personality that you've found who are, happy to pay for tips if they're going to be, winning over the long term?
I think it's a wide range. It's a wide audience, really. I've not found a certain demographic that is particularly obvious to in terms of the membership. I think people who do join have things in common. So often they either quite time poor. So maybe they are looking for some assistance because they don't have the time to put into the research of their own betting, or they're aware of their own shortcomings when it comes to betting. That's often a key one. When I speak to people who join, they've tried. They tried to bet themselves. They've not had much success, so they decide, like I did in the very early days, to find someone that can actually provide the expertise that they don't actually have.
So when you're going through, and you're obviously an expert at this now, what sort of tools can you use to try and find out if it's sort of a scam or a con artist sort of giving away tips that aren't necessarily verifiable or correct? What sort of some general advice you can give to those in other jurisdictions who might be thinking about even $50 or $100 for a subscription to a service? Are there some things that they can sort of check sort of pretty quickly and know if it's worthwhile, or is it a long, laborious process that you go down, and it's obviously very, very valuable for a lot of people, but it's sort of not necessarily scalable for the sort of average Joe punter?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the first bits of advice I would say is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So, if someone's claiming a 75% strike rate, or, a 60% return on investment, that is as unheard of, and it's very likely not accurate at all. But some of the more, other ways to kind of look into it is third-party verification. We offer, the Secret Betting Club offers a free proofing service. We're not the only ones. There are several other people who offer it for free, and they are reputable. So there's no reason for somebody not to have their advice verified. That's number one. Number two would be things like looking at their website. How much information do they provide? A basic requirement would be, is there a list of all the results, or is it just a list of the winners, or is it just a list of the bets that they want you to see? If it's just a small sample of the best and the highlights, that's a big warning sign. And then also, I always find you can gauge a lot by communicating, by sending emails, or maybe through social media. What's their kind of approach? How do they treat their customers? Do they? There's no harm in asking them a few questions, like what size betting band do you have, or what's your approach to settling prices? Do you quote the best price, or do you quote a price after 5 minutes, or these kind of things? And some simple questions like that. Fire an email, and if you get a one-line response, or you don't get a response, I think that might tell you everything. But some of the best services often have good customer service. So I'd also include that. Just to, you can just send an exploratory email or tweet, and it will inform you quite well.
So what about anonymity? I've found certainly in the sports betting areas, there's a lot of anonymous tipsters, or they've got sort of other names that they use, whether it's sort of catchy names or money names, bling names, things like that they use to, I guess, attract certain audiences. What does that tell you when you find anonymous tipsters? Because I'm sure there's some that are fine. But it seems like, I'm guessing the majority, when they're anonymous for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, there are occasions when I've dealt with people who had to be anonymous due to their job. So people that worked in the betting industry in certain ways, maybe worked at bookmakers, or worked in the horse racing industry, or whatever it might be. So there are occasions when, there is that need to hide their identity. But like you say, if most of the time I know who I'm dealing with, I know their name. I might never meet them, I might never pick up the phone and have a conversation with them, but I know their first name, their last name. I kind of get to know them a little bit. So I find that does help, yeah. And I think if you can't get details from someone and there's no good reason why, then that is a warning sign.
So one thing I see on Twitter a lot certainly is that such and such tipster is 7-1 last 8 plays, or 21-6 last 27 plays, and things like that. What is your opinion on the idea of a hot streak, or a hot hand when it comes to betting and tipping and those types of things. Is there a theory? Do you have a theory about it? Is it something that you're happy to push or promote or stand behind if someone is in some sort of streak mode? Is that something that's legitimate and something you've seen that's sort of sustainable, or is it something that's just variance and will eventually be, captured in that sort of ups and downs of betting and gambling?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the time it's just variance. If there's 6 from 7, all 7 of those events are independent of each other, so there's no way, there's no real connection between them. I really try and point secret betting club members away from getting overly concerned and overly excited about short-term form. It's just a variance. You're just going through good runs and bad runs, but you have to look at the long term. So, one of the reasons we only offer a 12-month subscription to our service is because we don't want people to, join for 2 weeks, give it a go, and then walk away, because ultimately it's doing no one any favors. You need to commit to, if you're going to follow a tipster, we put a patience rating on them. So, if you're following a guy who's tipping at big odds, double figure odds, for example, with a low strike rate, you're going to go through some tough times. You're going to need to be patient. So you need to bear all those things in mind. And if that doesn't appeal to you, then go find one of the guys that's got a 50% strike rate, and we'll kind of, you won't have that kind of high variance kind of betting approach. So I don't really put much in that. When I was thinking about this kind of thing, the one area, certain areas you can be aware of are certain things around conditions and time of year. So by conditions, let's think about the horse racing in England last week. It's summer at the moment there, and it's an English summer, so it means it's raining a lot. There's unseasonal weather, and the conditions were difficult. There was a lot of non-runners. So times like that, I would be wary about kind of betting, not because of a hot streak, but because it's very unpredictable. And in terms of like the Premier League, let's say that's just come back, and there's not much form in that league. So the first 3 or 4 weeks you might want to duck out of those kind of things. So they're the kind of streaks or times that I'd be more interested in, rather than kind of hot streaks where it's mainly just variance.
So let's talk about bookmakers and corporate bookmakers, because I guess in the current environment, to a large extent, there's a lot of restrictions on accounts that are winning, and there's a lot of closures, or there's a lot of bets that are being rejected. I would imagine this has a large impact on not only your winning tipsters and most of your tipsters, but also the clients. And how do you go about dealing with that? Do you approach it at all, or do you discuss it with the tipsters and the clients? And have you come up with any sort of ways to, or solutions for this issue?
Yeah, so it is a big issue, and it is one that we have covered in depth, certainly not shying away from it. In terms of who it impacts the sport and the market you're betting on. Depends on how much it'll impact you. So some of the more niche areas, and I would include horse racing in that, it's more difficult to get, to win substantial sums of money on horse racing and not suffer. You're more likely to suffer restrictions through if you're betting heavily on horse racing with bookmakers. And then, some of the niche leagues. So, if you're betting on Spanish League 2, if you're betting in the Colombian Premier Division, if you're betting in areas where there's not a lot of money traded, you're going to suffer potential restrictions. Compare that to sports like football, tennis, and golf, where there's lots of money, there's lots of liquidity on the exchanges in Asia. Those things are less likely to impact you, and which is advice. Certain part of the advice we supply to secret betting club members is be careful and be shrewd about how much you're staking and where you're betting on what sports. So maybe you need to spread your stakes around. Maybe you need to bet at different times when the market's got more money in it. Maybe you need to throw a few curveballs for the bookmaker so they don't think you're shrewd. So it is an increasing issue. But I think if you're cute about it and you're shrewd about it, and you have the expertise behind you to say, this is what you need to be careful of, this is how you need to structure your betting, structure your staking, you can kind of you can obviously live with it and still get by. But it's an increasing issue, but and one that is impacting sports like horse racing more and more these days. That's for certain.
So what about exchanges and marketplaces? What sort of position do they have in the, I guess, in the bookmaker operator world? Are they something that will ultimately take over from corporate bookmakers, or are they going to have a much larger presence when we're talking about the match books and the Betfairs of the world? Because a lot of smart punters are being shut down, and if they can't get their money down, they're going to go to either other sports, they're going to go elsewhere, or they're going to have to look to other betting platforms other than the corporate bookmakers?
Yeah, I think more and more people are going onto the exchanges. Betfair has obviously been around for a long time, but yeah, Betfair has been around, but still all the other high street bookies are still there, and they're still they're still making significant profits. Whether that's going to change with some of the clampdown upon in the United Kingdom of the fixed odds betting terminals, which are providing a large swathe of those profits, is to be seen. But yeah, more and more punters are going to them. But even with Betfair being around for so long, like I say, the bookmakers are still there. But what has been good is you mentioned Matchbook. Also, I like Smarkets. They're very good on both of those Smarkets and Matchbook, increasing their volume and liquidity and providing more competition to Betfair, who had a monopoly on it really for a long time, and they've got lower commission rates, which is for the punters' benefit. So it's driving down the costs to use the exchanges, and hopefully more and more people will start to go over there and start to use these exchanges, because you're not going to get restricted on them. My advice for anybody is, if you can place your bet on an exchange or a bookmaker, place it on the exchange. Always put that first, and make that your first port of call.
So you mentioned sort of being shrewd about your staking and things like that. Are there any other pieces of advice you can give to the professionals or those who do well in a certain area, whether it be a lower division league and they can't quite get the volume down, or even just the average punter who maybe goes on a bit of a streak and then they sort of see their bets limited in a certain sport or things like that? Do you have any sort of, I guess, life hacks and secret tips you can give for those people who are in those situations, or is it just the reality of the betting market these days and it's something that has to be accepted if you're going to win, that you're going to face it and you've just got to deal with it like you deal with many other aspects of sort of betting and gambling?
Yeah, it is. Ultimately, it's a fact of life that it probably will happen even with the best will in the world. I guess what I'm helping people do is, as best as they can, is to extend the life span of their accounts. And it can make a big difference. So some of the things I would say would be you're tracking how much you're winning with one bookmaker, how much you've won on certain of the niche sports. I know I include horse racing. That's not really niche. It's more in terms of where there's less volume traded and in that area. So be aware of that. So if you're winning significant monies on the Premier League or over Asian handicaps, you're not going to worry about it. But if you backed a bunch of horses at big prices that have won, be careful. Maybe you want to do something like back a favourite and lay it on Betfair. You might lose a few percent on that, but what's the value of your betting account, of your bookmaker account? So some of the advice that I've been given along the way are things like chucking in £20 on the casino. Have a spin on the casino, have a spin on the roulette. The things that they want you to bet on. So chuck in some accumulators. You needn't do them for large stakes, and it just kind of helps to throw the bookmaker off the scent that you know what you're doing. Because if they just see a pattern of shrewd bet, you've took a good price here, you've had a whole bunch of winners on this market, that there's going to get flagged. But then if you're chucking in a bunch of curveballs where they can't see a pattern and it looks like you've got lucky, then that certainly can help extend the life of your account. For those listeners based in who are able to bet with the bookmaker black type, they're also a really interesting relative newcomer to the betting scene. So with sport like horse racing, which is very popular with people secret betting club members, they're willing to lose up to £500 on a horse racing bet from 8:30 in the morning. So they might not always be best price, but they're still competitive. We did some analysis; the odds are still pretty good. Look to use them, look to use the exchanges, and if you continue with horse racing, for example, because it's a really important one. One of the big areas, and it goes into our review analysis as well, is the time of day that the tipster puts up their bets. So one kind of sneaky way some racing tipsters like to kind of pump up their performance is by advising a horse racing bet, say at 6 p.m. the night before it's due to race. So maybe the race is going at 3 p.m. the next day. That's 21 hours ahead. The prices at 6 p.m. the night before are going to be, very, very flimsy at best. And if you're following even a half decent tipster, those odds are going to get slashed in. You might back it at 21 the night before, 20 to 1. It'll be perhaps 10 to 1 by the morning, and then start at 6 to 1. Even if it wins or not, your account is just not going to last at all long if you keep doing that. So that's another bit of advice for people, on horse racing. And that goes back into what to look out for with tipsters. If you're looking for horse racing tipsters, it's vitally important you know what time they're tipping up. And if they're tipping up into illiquid markets, be very, very careful indeed.
Some very interesting concepts and advice. I hadn't heard of some of those, especially casino spins and things like that, or even just betting a horse you don't necessarily want to be on. But if you can sort of lay off somewhere else and put in a position, even a small losing position, that'll extend the life of your account. That's a very interesting, I guess, advice for those who are in that lucky sort of range of getting their accounts closed down, because it certainly doesn't happen to all of us. I want to talk about the issues of tipsters entering into sort of arrangement with bookmakers for giving, not necessarily losing tips, but for punters who they sort of refer who are losing. Is that something that's sort of widespread, or is it not a huge issue that you've sort of come across?
It is becoming more and more widespread. It's one reason that at SBC, we don't review any tipsters with just a social media presence. The thinking is that it's too easily manipulated. You can delete posts and tweets, you can set up new accounts so easily. And there has been an increase I've noticed on social media of tipsters doing kind of challenges. Often they're trying to win, 10 short price bets, and they're kind of compound staking. But they always say, bet with X bookmaker or Y bookmaker, and that is because they are on a loss share deal. And it's a big problem because they're putting forward that, follow me, I'm an expert, but ultimately they're only interested in putting up losing tips. The bookmaker wins, the punter loses. So and they might make 10-20% of the losses that they send to the bookmaker via these bets. So it's a real problem area. And I know if you're on Instagram or social media, I'm sure it's just Instagram, maybe it's Twitter as well, and if you're promoting a product and you don't make it clear that you're promoting it, you can get blacklisted in various ways, can't you? So I think perhaps something needs to happen on that front, and there needs to be some kind of clarity. There's been a lot of developments, with the Gambling Commission in the United Kingdom, in England, because there's all kinds of problems with bookmakers, restrictions being the tip of the iceberg here, and they're starting to flex their muscles, which is long overdue. And I think this is perhaps one of the areas they might need to focus on as well.
So what are some of the stories you've heard, or have you been, I guess, privy to some of the machinations behind how it actually works? Is it someone at a bookmaking, I guess, operator talking to a person who's active on social media accounts and things like that, literally discussing taking a cut of all of the losses and trying to attract those recreational punters? Because I've seen some bite back from those types of accounts saying, well, I just want sort of my followers to get access to a lot of free bets, and yeah, they might lose, but if they get a lot of free bets and have some fun in the meantime, I'm not really too worried about it. What's sort of your insights, if you have any, on how that actually plays out?
Yeah, well, I think all bookmakers have all have affiliate programs, which reward people who refer customers to them, and a majority of them are loss revenue based. So it's kind of widespread, and it's kind of accepted, I suppose. There's a few. So if you work with any of the exchanges, they'll make it based on a percentage of the commission potentially, or if it's a broker, it might be on turnover, a very small percentage. but most of the bookmakers, yes, it's all on less revenue. I don't know how these kind of things work and what the kind of conversations that go on actually are, but I'm sure whilst they might put forward that, oh well, it's just for a bit of fun and this kind of thing, some of these guys with large followers, a large number of followers, will be making significant sums from all of this. So hopefully something can be done about it.
Yeah, certainly. So do you have any, I guess you mentioned 11 years you've been doing this, are there any traits that stand out from some of the best tipsters who have sort of long track records and things you've sort of delved in pretty deep and seen some of the things they're doing that you can share? Or is it pretty simple and it's hard work and getting the best number and a lot of the things that we hear consistently? Or are there things that sort of stand out to you as some of the, I guess, the more positive traits from those who are winning long term?
Yeah, well, I think in this day and age, one of the most important traits that a tipster can kind of offer is being fair with the odds that they both quote and settle to. So I touched briefly on horse racing tipsters and those putting up prices that you can't get, or even if you can, you'll be restricted. That's one of the kind of the key things, and how SBC has evolved in our reviews, really, because when we first started, you could win pretty much whatever you wanted up to a certain extent, maybe 5-figure sums with a bookmaker without issue per year, whereas those days have long gone. So one of the things that we've looked for is odds availability. So if a tipster's quoting a certain price, how long does that price stay available for? Which bookmaker is that price put up with? Are they reputable? Can you get on? Will they restrict? So, that is kind of the key thing I would look for these days is, about the prices, the bookmaker policy, the way they quote their results and settle their results. Things like with horse racing, you have Rule 4 deductions, which are, it's a percentage deduction if there's a non-runner in the race after you place the bet. Now, some tipsters don't quote for that; they don't include that in their kind of performance, and it can be significant. So, if a favourite is removed from a race, you could have a 40% reduction, for example. So, and that's obviously a big deduction if your bet goes on to win. So, things like that are really important to kind of gauge. And so the best tipsters have really fair policies on that. You don't need to ask them what they are. They kind of make it clear on their website, or they make it clear on their results sheet, or in some way they're trying to illustrate just how fair they are. So that's the key thing I would look for, is that practicality of, can you replicate the results that the tipster is putting forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was digging into your site, I noticed some sort of ready-to-go betting systems you had on there. I think there was one for golf that I sort of spent a bit of time going through. Is that correct? And what's sort of the rationale behind providing that sort of information?
Well, that's more of a legacy system, so that was one that was put forward and kept on the site. So there's less on some of the systems these days. You're generally finding some of the systems, finding new ones, finding good ones is really difficult. There still needs to be an element of kind of human interaction, human involvement in it. So that's why we've kept some of these golf ones on there, and they're still useful and they're still informative. But they haven't found anything necessarily of quality to replace it. And it's an interesting point, talking about betting systems, because I do get a lot of emails about them, because that is an area where there's still a lot of marketing, a lot of emails going out about this wonder system. It'll change your life. The reality is they're few and far between. And if you can find a good system, do let me know, because I haven't found too many of late that continue to work.
Well, that's the reason I asked, because I certainly these days, with the prevalence of social media and computing power and technology, these systems sort of aren't around very long. And the more I talk to people, the more they say, yeah, I had an edge for half a season, or a few months and things like that, and then they just disappeared. So I guess it's something that sort of everyone's dealing with now, and they've got to add different variables to their models, and they've got to update things and continue to evolve and learn and be curious and sort of transfer from other sports and other people who are betting and winning, and taking little tidbits from everywhere they can to sort of add to their possibility overall of winning.
Yeah, well, the market becomes more efficient, doesn't it? It reacts to all the different inputs coming into it. So you do need to evolve with it. Whether it's evolving with the changing state of where you can bet and who you can bet with, or whether it's just the market and just becoming more efficient as more inputs come into it. So yeah, it's become harder and harder to certainly beat without constant evolution and constantly being on top of and tweaking what you're actually doing. And that's why we found, I think, that some of the best sources are actually these tipsters who are real experts, and they understand their strengths and understand their weaknesses. So they're able to adapt and change, which keeps them one step ahead of the bookmaker.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing I want to touch on is money management. You have a lot of good information on the Secret Betting Club site about that. Do you want to just touch on a couple of the main points that you sort of offer, and I guess some of the things that people should be looking to do if they want to be more serious about their betting?
Yeah, certainly. Money management is critical, really, for making the most of your betting. It's just some simple things can make a big difference. So, setting up how much money you have to bet with is important. So it's segregating that. So you're not just kind of dipping into your bank account or your day-to-day current account, and you're never really on top of how much you're winning and losing. So it's good to separate that, and then also following the staking plan of tips to put forward and using a designated betting bank for that. So that's just it's a fictional way of segregating some of that money and saying that is dedicated to this tipster, and I'm going to follow if he's betting in points and he says, 1 point for me is worth £10, is worth $20, whatever it might be. But then you have that kind of discipline and understanding of how much you should be staking on any given bet. And that's important for so many reasons, least of all, how to handle a bad run. We can all handle good runs, generally okay. I mean, some people do go overboard, but handling bad runs and losing runs is one of the most critical things any aspiring punter can kind of learn to overcome. I've seen so many people kind of walk away because they couldn't handle a bad run, and obviously the money management, having a betting bank, having a staking plan is probably the ultimate way of keeping on top of that. So if you can see the history of the service and you can see previous bad runs and you can see how you cope with them and the service came out of it and went out the other side and actually is making profit again, it brings you that confidence. You can handle it. It's been through that before, and you can also see what you've made and if you're up, and you can keep your staking consistent. So the temptation might be during a good and bad run to change the stakes, or I'll put half stakes on, I'll put quarter stakes on because it's having a poor run. Reality is, variance is such that it's just randomness and there's nothing to reduce your stakes. But as soon as you do, a good run's going to hit and you're going to miss out, and all that hard work's going to be undone. So the money management side of it is really important. It's something that we try and drum home to people and try to emphasize as much as we can, because you could have the best tips in the world, but if you're not disciplined with your staking and you're not got the right money management, you might not actually succeed by following them.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. I read a research paper recently about a rigged coin flip that was 60% in favor of heads and 40% tails, and of the 30 well-educated people, and some of them were in finance, I believe, or MBA students, there were some who chose tails for more than one spin, and some went bankrupt, and some didn't even make any money on their balance. So, you're right. I think the staking and money management side of it is as important as having a great tipster or positive expectation, tips going forward. So certainly something for those who are interested to dig into your content and get some sort of good insights on what they should be doing. Before I let you... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add as well, one of the other things I would suggest is, haven't spoken about this, but is emotionally detaching yourself from your betting. And I think this is critical as well with the staking. But I find that, if you watch a race or watch an event or a sport that you've got a bet on, you become so much more involved in it, and you're influenced so much more by the result, win or lose. So that's the other key point I would add into that is, making sure that, the way I look at my bets is it's just a win or a loss. It's just lines on a spreadsheet. And I know there's appeal for people who like certain sports, but it's separating: are you betting because you like the buzz from betting and watching the sport, or are you betting because you want to make some money? I fall in that latter camp a lot of the time. So one of my recommendations would be to be careful if you're watching a sport, if you're getting too heavily involved, because it can emotionally impact you, and then from that you can often make some pretty poor decisions.
Yeah, certainly. I think we've all been there. Before I let you go, I want to ask, what's a good way or the best way for those who are interested in taking a look at the Secret Betting Club to get involved, and maybe some initial steps they can take with the site and moving forward to find the best way to utilize the service for them?
Of course, yeah. So you can visit secretbettingclub.com, and you can find me on Twitter. I'm at SBCinfo, INFO. And if you visit our website, and you can find it, it's a pinned tweet as well. We've got a variety of reports you can download for free. We've got some sample tips to review, some samples and excerpts from some of our profit reports, and some of the interviews that we've run with successful punters. So all of which will give you a good grounding and kind of insight into some of the information that we offer. Yeah,
I can say I had some great fun looking at some of the content on the site, and I certainly urge those who are interested to reach out on Twitter or to go on the site and have a look around and see what might be useful for them and their punting. Peter, thank you very much for your time. I normally speak to professional punters or bookmakers or other people directly involved in the betting, but it's been very, very fun to chat to you about the tipster industry and some of the stuff that's going on. So all the very best with you and what you're doing, and I hope to do this again soon.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jake. It's great to kind of talk about the tipster world, and hopefully we've been able to help some of your listeners if interested in tipsters.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.